Hey everyone, my name is Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc Labs, and welcome to our latest live event. Today's topic is going to be around wallets to ID wallets, and we're going to be looking at how digital ID will transform payments. We've got two esteemed guests that we're lucky to have joining us today. We have Leonard Botezatu, who is the Director of Product and Service Design within the Identity Group at Mastercard. Thanks for coming on, Leonard.
Thank you.
We've also got David Kelts. David's been on before, so he's obviously a glutton for punishment coming back on. And David is a co-chair of the mDL Jumpstart Committee at the Secure Technology Alliance. David, how are you?
I'm doing great today. Appreciate the
Great.
chance to be on.
Oh, you're very welcome. So this is going to be a great session, one I'm really excited about. And as I've talked about, it's going to be really kind of focusing on ID and its integration and impact that it will have across payments. And so as a kind of precursor to this, mDLs or mobile driver's licenses, as we're kind of getting used to them being shortened to, within the US are available now in about 18 states. It's hard to always keep track, but it's about 18 states. And I think they're coming online in more through the course of the rest of this year, some in the region of 6 to 8 more states. And what we'd like to kind of examine today with Leonard and David is what do these new forms of digital ID that are verifiable, what do they mean for banks? What do they mean for payment providers? What do they mean for merchants? And just what does it mean for the person in the street? How will life change for them? So hopefully that's going to be a really exciting topic for us to cover. Thanks for you to those who are listening through Riverside, listening to this live. The session will last, as usual, for about 1 hour. About 45 minutes or so of that will be a Q&A between the three of us. And then that'll be followed by a kind of audience Q&A. So you've got the opportunity in the audience to just ask some questions. So just pop them into the Riverside chat as normal. Francisco will round all up the best questions, or even just all of the questions, and we'll try to make sense of them and get you some answers to the topics that you care about. And if you are listening on Riverside, please do pop in a note into the chat, just letting us know where you're listening from, just so that we know there's some sign of life and we're not just talking to each other, albeit that will be very enjoyable. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our guests. Leonard, did you want to give a kind of brief intro to yourself and maybe a little bit about your work at Mastercard?
Yes. Hi, Nick. Thanks for the invite. And David, good to see you again. My name is Leonard. I'm a product and innovation designer on the identity team at Mastercard. I've been working in the identity space for almost 5 years, so fairly new to this. But a lot of groundwork has been done by the industry, including your company, Nick. So I thank you for that. And I feel like I landed right when very exciting things are starting to happen, especially in the US and Europe. My main focus has been design and product design throughout my career. And since joining Mastercard, my expertise has narrowed to enhancing identity solutions and innovation. And this feeds into how I got to know David. So a few months back, I had the opportunity to join the mDL Connection Working Group, led by Carolyn, David, and Sandy, where I'm contributing on enhancing the educational dimension of mDLs from a product design standpoint. And I have to say the experience has been both rewarding and energizing.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Leonard. And David, if you could introduce yourself, please, that'd be great.
Sure. David Kelts. I've been working for actually over a dozen years now with the ISO standards development through Working Group 10 of mobile driver's license, and also on OpenID side, like sort of how those things come together and join together. Um, Within the context of Secure Technology Alliance, yes, I do run something we call the mDL Jumpstart Committee, which is banding together of different organizations, vendors in the space, privacy advocates in the space, and everything. Just how do we build up this ecosystem? Because we all are aware of the chicken and egg problem. STA, so Secure Technology Alliance's history is a little relevant here. Secure Technology Alliance has two major forums, the Identity Access Forum that we're part of, and then also the U.S. Payments Forum, which led the revolution or the increase in chip card tap to pay, and then some of the phone payment technology. So that getting over that hurdle of um, in-person experiences for payment and moving them towards tap to pay, towards cryptography, that's part of the DNA or the history and part of what we draw on in Secure Technology Alliance from the U.S. Payments Forum side. And then obviously the group that's involved having a lot of payments members, it makes a lot of sense that we build, as we're trying to build this ecosystem, contribute to building the ecosystem. Um, we're looking at this with a payments lens. So that kind of brings us to today and how this all kind of fits together.
Yeah, thanks for that. And David, just then also picking up on the fact, kind of talking about your work at the Technology Alliance, and obviously there was a kind of technology showcase earlier this year. I think it was in February. I'm going to say it was in San Diego. I think it was thereabouts. But
that's correct. Yeah.
They did a kind of a coming together of organizations working in and around the space, implementers and companies wanting to work with his technology, put them all in the room for a few days and try to kind of work together and move things forward. What did you learn at that session? What were the kind of main outcomes as you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, we learned quite a lot. Actually, it was really interesting. So the purpose of the showcase was to have an exhibition floor, like have a floor of different use cases. Every table, there were 14 tables. Every table had to be a use case itself. Like, you had to define, okay, we're going to do bank onboarding. We're going to do a healthcare check-in. We're going to do a stadium checkout, online purchase of alcohol and delivery, right? So each one was it. And the idea was for people to come in with their mDLs, and to actually go around the room and try it and learn how these interactions go. And then for people as well as observers, to be able to do that. So there were about 400 people that ended up coming through the doors during the course of it and to see the 14 tables. One of the key things that I think was really indicator of the growth of this over time was a year before we had open sessions at the same Identity and Payment Summit. We had issuers come in. There were 4 or 5 of them that were up on stage talking about, like, hey, we've rolled this out. Now, come on, build some use cases. Let's give people a place to use these things, and that will create the pull in the marketplace for this to grow. And now, fast forward a year, we've got actual functioning use cases, at 14 different tables, and there were more that, of companies that couldn't come. The idea at the event was, if you're going to use your own, like within the event, selective disclosure, nobody was going to store data. There was, the kind of typical privacy requirements you would find in a trust framework that were involved in the event so that it was safe for everybody to go ahead and use that. I think it was really strong confirmation of growth in the marketplace year over year. Not that we're where we need to be. So let me talk about that side, because that side of it was actually a little surprising. The comment, and we went through sort of an extensive feedback process. Each table did feedback. We had 6 questions they had to answer. We pulled that together. We offered that as well to any of the attendees from the payment space, all the U.S. Payments Forum that came through. We offered that to them as well to provide feedback, and we just had stacks of comments. And what was really interesting and surprising was that we don't have quite the interoperability yet that that matches up with what the market expectations are going to be. And I know I kind of hate saying it because it's a bit of a detriment to the fact that there's market growth, but what does that mean as we broke it down? What does it mean not to be as interoperable? Some of that came from the fact that people had their state issued mDLs inside a wallet application. Again, that varies, right? As we all know, Apple Wallet, Google Wallet, state-based apps that are holding it, third-party apps like what holds Utah's. So there was an array of these things, and the implementations of the standard there are slightly different, and they're slightly different than the implementations that the relying parties do. So, for instance, not all of those implementations support NFC, and yet NFC is a key part of what's in the payment space. It's a key part of the point of sale. So you could walk up with your state issued mDL inside an application and not be able to interact with that particular payment, right? So I think we have to look at, as an industry, look at how we expand the interaction modes in order to fit all of the different places where we use these. Similar on the over the web. Now, granted, 18013.7 was just published this year, but there were implementations of, like I mentioned, purchase from a liquor store online, present your ID online, and then the person can verify that. The delivery person can verify your identity when you show up. That's not in the state issued apps. It is in sample apps. So there's a bit of growth. The standards are set and we know they all work and they've been tested numerically. They're shown they all function. There's a bit of growth still in the marketplace, primarily on the app and wallet side, but then also on the relying party side to get to the point where we have the interoperability that's going to make the marketplace kind of sing.
And I think as well, like David, what you're saying is you kind of saw it as a detriment, but I guess this is precisely why these events are so valuable. This is exactly what they're for. It's to spot these gaps
Right.
that maybe there wasn't a broad awareness that they existed. Maybe some people knew they were there. Maybe the engineers at the coalface did, but the industry more broadly didn't. And so I wouldn't necessarily see that as some kind of a negative thing. I think it's just good that the industry is actually proving itself out. Who's like, in terms of like, just for the audience, who are the types of company we're talking about? Small companies, and feel free to name drop here if you want, David, and if it's allowed as well, because I'm not sure people are trying to be covert at going to these events. But are these some of the really biggest companies in tech that are going to these events? Just to give, I guess, listeners some sense of like, are we talking about mass adoption relatively quickly here?
All across the board, as for the size of the companies that took part. And so you have startups. It was sponsored by OneProof. That's a startup company doing reader applications and so that they certainly can mention them as a sponsor of it. The event was sponsored by Matter, which the identity side of it, they had things there in partnership with Visa, who was taking place. Samsung had tables. Google with the open source wallet foundation, the Open Wallet Foundation effort. Multipass was there with their application so that they can use it. So you really do have, and I have to apologize because there's 14 companies and I know I didn't mention them all. You can look up the video of the event that's online. It really ranges. Your comment was, are we looking at mass adoption soon? Well, yeah, because the key thing is, when the relying parties start to roll out acceptance in the real world, there's already there's nearly 5 million base of mDLs that have been issued in the United States across the states that you mentioned, and more states this year. You were accurate, Nick. I think we're going to get to half the states this year that have it rolled out. So the pull in the marketplace comes from the relying parties rolling this out. And then you'll see people like, oh, I can do that? I didn't even know. But all range of companies and a really energizing event. I think you can extrapolate that next year we'll see a lot of that interoperability problem solved. We'll see a lot of additional rollout, more features on the platform, wallets. So
yeah, very good. And Leonard, kind of moving over to yourself now, obviously, as we talked about in the intro, you're working with Mastercard, obviously massive company within the payment space. Maybe you could give us some insight into why Mastercard is investing in mDLs now. And the second part to that is, what are the strategic advantages that you're hoping to gain either for you or your kind of merchants or partners?
I think going back to what I said earlier on the groundwork starting to take shape, one of the biggest challenges of identity verification solutions we've seen in the past few years was the lack of interoperability. I know this is oversimplified, but looking at federated solutions like single sign-on or document checks against a database, these were great solutions solving for a particular need. But to solve the fragmentation problem, an international standard like the mDL ISO was needed. So from my point of view, standards drive harmonization, leading to a more kind of a cohesive and accessible digital identity ecosystem. So this is the high level context in which a global company adopting an international standard like the mDL ISO has a huge benefit. I think it's important to mention the entire financial sector is based on standards, like the ISO 222, which is a standard for financial messaging, various ISO standards for credit and debit cards, EMVCO, FDX in the US for open finance. And to give you an example of how global standards work in practice, a credit card issued in the United States can be used for payments almost anywhere in the world. Likewise, an mDL issued in one jurisdiction can be securely verified and accepted in another. So, from an ecosystem point of view, I think universal acceptance is very important because it could facilitate identity verification globally for various use cases, especially where identity verification is needed alongside a payment. And this, from a business perspective, is very important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think like that wording, what I've learned in having a couple of these discussions and events with other companies that are seeing this. So one was with I often cite is Paul Grassi at Amazon, and it became clear speaking to them that they were often verifiers of visitors to the platforms. They'd have to do a lot of the legwork to try and understand not necessarily who they are, but maybe like how old they were or something like that for an age restricted good. And they very much wanted to move themselves into a world of acceptance, like you said, Leonard. So it becomes about not needing to actually go and do any kind of manual verification work themselves. It was really to make their life easier and to enable the user to come to them with a kind of verified ID document. Well, it's a driver's license, but it's kind of pseudo used as an ID document to then prove age or prove something else, really making their life easier at scale. And so this difference between a verifier and acceptor is something that I've kind of learned over the last few months is really significant. And I think that's what you're talking about there, the advantages that you can provide to your partners. And kind of cutting back over to you then, David, just looking again, maybe sometimes more at the kind of the user experiences again. So starting to think about like what is the individual in the street, what do they benefit from these impending changes? And in your vision, how do you think mDL is going to change the user experience in things like banking and payments and just e-commerce and other interactions like that generally?
Yeah, so you're asking a vision question, and I kind of have an answer that might cover user experience, the relying party experience, and then like policy. So if I
Sure.
can, I'll
Give us what you've got.
yeah, I mean from the user experience point of view, there's a real frustration in that analog to digital bridge that has to be formed right now, right? Like, oh, I got to go get my card and hold this thing and scan it. And so I think that that digital native and cryptographically signed piece from the user point of view, there's a convenience there, but there's also a powerful level of control that's there. I've had people say to me like yeah, I actually have to physically hand my card over, right? And but I feel much more control when this is on my phone. And that's interesting. Like, so I think that and the ability, so selective disclosure changes quite a lot there. If I am purchasing an age restricted grid, you mentioned Amazon, like, for Amazon, from their point of view, wow, I have to take this upload of this ID document and I have to process it. And then I got all this information that I didn't really want. I didn't need it to do this transaction. Um, Now, if I can just ask for what I want, and it's pretty simple for that, and I can check the cryptographic signature on it, I think that changes their viewpoint. When you start to apply that in banking too, um, you have the combination of that definitiveness of cryptographic signatures on the data. That has a lot of meaning to the relying parties, um, and the ability to reduce the set that they're asking for. So now take that and translate that over to policy. I think we have a view of the world that's encoded in our laws, um, around the world, that is data protection. We know that everybody's going to ask for data. We know we're going to type in all this data, and that we know that they're going to store it. This is the chance for that equation to start to turn, and for policy to start to change on this. Because now, if you simply make the policy, you should only ask for the data that you know and you require for that transaction. If that policy exists, as it does within multiple trust frameworks, it starts to change. If you say don't store it unless you have been clear to the user that you were going to store it, use the intent to store flag. If you start to put some of those policies together, you really start to change the dynamic of it. Um, Relying parties can store less information. They can be less, um, subject to breach, right? And and the cost of that, because the cost of a breach is enormous. If it's pretty straightforward to do that, and you have this dynamic, easy to ask environment, then you can start to change that dynamic, which will really help in the long run from a data protection point of view, right? It changes from data protection to a different kind of concept. So, vision of how this is going to reshape those things, I think that's my view of it. But
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the other thing as well, I think people sometimes mistake that these large companies generally want to hold all this data about you, because every big company in the world, it wants to mine your data, and some of them do. I think the reality is different though. Sometimes these companies don't want this data. They don't want the liability. But it's hoovered up with all the other stuff that they get. They've got no way of separating it out. And I think that this will be better for users, that they can just selectively disclose certain attributes, or the ones just relevant to whatever verification is taking place. But I think that the organizations will be able to store much less, and I think they'll also be happy about that as well. Leonard, do you have anything
Great.
more you wanted to add about this? What do you see, how mDLs are going to really improve things, or change the user experience?
So, as a product designer, one of my main objectives is to be an advocate for the user. With that in mind, from my perspective, there are two key aspects I would like to highlight. Number one is privacy by design. So this is perhaps the most important aspect, because unlike physical IDs that reveal all your personal information, mDLs allow for what you just mentioned earlier, selective disclosure. So when you want to purchase age-restricted goods, for example, the merchant only needs proof that you're over 18 or 21, depending on the region, not your driving privileges, name, address, not even the date of birth or exact age. So the same goes for proof of identity, for example. Your name and photo can be selectively shared, keeping other personal details private. So users' privacy, from my point of view, is perhaps the most important. The second aspect I would like to highlight is inclusion. According to some estimations, there are around 1 billion people who don't have proof of identity, and therefore restricted access to things like social services, healthcare, or banking. And since I mentioned banking, the same estimations say that there are more than 1.4 billion people who are unbanked. This number used to be much higher 10 years ago, but nonetheless, it's still a very high number. So digital identity standards like the mDL ISO are seen as crucial tools to bridge this gap. When it comes to enhanced user experience, to answer your question, Nick, I can give you a recent example. As part of the mDL connection group, myself and David are members of, we recently looked at an interactive proof of concept done by Nest. It showed a user creating a new bank account remotely using the mDL wallet to share personal information required by the bank. For me, it was very exciting to see how a cumbersome in-person process could be done online without sacrificing security and with a huge time-saving convenience.
Yeah, thank you. And are there specific, when we're kind of staying with you, Leonard, are there specific payment scenarios that are top of mind when you think about mDL support? David mentioned some of the kind of use cases that they're looking at the demo event earlier this year. What were you guys thinking about at Mastercard regards kind of payment support?
When it comes to secure remote onboarding, a user could consent to share their verified identity data like name, address, date of birth directly from their mDL wallet with the requester or relying party. And this process can be done in seconds, basically eliminating manual data entry, document scans, video calls. This obviously can lead to massive reduction in friction and therefore drop-offs, which, as you know, is one of the kind of key KPIs for any business. And the same applies and speaking from our business perspective, the same applies to card present, card not present, or buy online and pick up in store for age-restricted goods. Like no more 5-minute long document checks against the database with, frankly, quite high fail rates.
Yeah. And would you also expect fraud reduction there as well, Leonard? I mean, as part of this process? Or if we know once we add it in?
Yeah, there are a couple of types of fraud that make up the majority of fraud in the financial sector, at least. A couple worth mentioning are synthetic identity, account takeover, or friendly fraud. For those in the audience who are not familiar, synthetic identity fraud is a growing and complex fraud type where fraudsters combine real and fake information to create a seemingly legitimate new identity. So in this case, synthetic identity fraud becomes difficult to execute because mDLs are cryptographically bound to a real person, like the wallet holder, so to speak. Likewise, account takeover fraud, which relies on stolen credentials from scams, data breaches, or phishing. We see a lot of these nowadays, can be substantially mitigated. The binding of the mDL to the user's device, very often coupled with biometric authentication, means that even if login credentials are compromised, an unauthorized party would still struggle to impersonate the legitimate owner. So that was synthetic identity and account takeover. Finally, friendly fraud, or also known as first-party fraud, is most common in e-commerce and happens when a legitimate customer makes a purchase and then they dispute the charge with their bank, claiming the transaction was never authorized or they never received the goods, even if they did. So in this case, by providing a strong verifiable proof of identity at the point of sale, with mDLs, we can create a clear audit trail and undeniable evidence that the legitimate cardholder authorized the transaction.
I think what's interesting, thanks for those answers, Leonard. I think what's interesting here is normally when you try to make something more secure, it adds friction to an onboarding process or a journey, and everyone that's running that product or service is naturally concerned about the increase in drop-offs and ultimately the impact it has on its top line. I think the interesting thing about the potential for mDLs, if it's done correctly, is the ability to not only reduce fraud, but actually, as you know, we're discussing there, it's actually a better user experience. Like David is talking about, you know, privacy enhanced experiences where they can selectively disclose just, you know, single or small numbers of attributes. And even to your point, which I think it will bring us on to our next question, Leonard, that you were making, you're almost kind of, I think, defining a reusable KYC type situation where you can use an MDL to onboard into something new and to prove certain things about yourself without needing to fill out a form. So it seems like it's the best of both worlds, potentially. You know, reduced fraud and also better usability, which it seems pretty rare to me. Coming over to you, David, and picking up that thread of KYC again, and just can you talk us through the potential for digital ID credentials to replace or augment those existing KYC processes?
Yeah, so I would say this isn't going to replace these processes, augment these processes, and then provide a channel. The opportunity to do this now, there's a couple of different, like the same device flows where you're going to have an MDL and the bank application on the same device, right? That I know we saw at the showcase. And then these sort of like cross, like using it in the browser, these flows are both available and both can be done. It's almost like one of these things to me seems like a no-brainer. Like I would do this so that even though I know that a couple things are going to happen, one, I'm not going to see a huge uptake yet because there's not a lot of holders, but at least the option's there and I can see how this works. I get the deterministic nature of the cryptographic signatures, which is a huge advantage. I should see fewer drop-offs. Leonard was mentioning the user friction, right? Like the duration of these things and how long it takes is a huge part of user friction. So I get to I know that the fraudsters are going to use the existing vectors, but as time grows, I can change the equation that I use. You said KYC and AML, right? So I can change the equations that I use because I know that the deterministic nature of this is going to change the risk equation, like the risk adjustments that I have to do, right? So I can be pretty sure that's not a synthetic identity when I see this on that. So what does that mean? What does that mean I can adjust? How much other costs can I reduce in my whole flow of onboarding this customer? How many other costs can I cut out from that because they don't have to? Now, granted, you still have to do anti-money laundering and all that. But I think this becomes a bit of a no-brainer to do now and try in order to see how that vector goes and make your calculations about what the effect of it is and the enhancement.
That's really a good insight. And from your perspective, David, in what ways are you guys working with kind of banks and merchants? Obviously, we've got a good sense of how Mastercard's thinking about things. But what about you and whether it's Secure Technology Alliance or some of the other organizations that you're involved with? How are you working with those types of companies?
As Secure Technology Alliance, myself, I have interest in how payments and identity come together and how these wallets come together and the potential of the one tap to pay an ID kind of scenario like that. But then Secure Technology Alliance, and Leonard mentioned, we run mdlconnection.com, which is an educational resource. We have quite a few people from the payment space who are regulars, companies that are contributing. We're looking for more there because we want to not just build up the use cases, but build up the framework in which these operate. Let's look at, especially in the United States, it's a US organization, how do we make sure that all the participants in this ecosystem are playing by the right rules? How are they protecting privacy, all the way from the issuers through to the wallet holders, to the relying parties, to those that are going to store data? Like, what's this mean? And we want to build this out, publish more guidance for them. So open invitation to other companies to come in and join the 40 or 50 so that are active now and to start to work with us to define how this ecosystem does the right thing in the United States.
Yeah, so it's a lot about training, support, education, which is obviously what's always needed at these early stages. And why is now the right time? I think we talked a little bit, David, about, like, I was asking that probably noob question about mass adoption, when do we get there type thing that your kids normally ask annoyingly from the back of the car. But where are we today, would you say? I mean, in terms of, like, why should businesses want to get involved now, and what levels of adoption are we seeing right now, particularly in North America?
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, we're in a way, I guess I'll repeat the stats from earlier that we both shared, all three of us shared, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, 14 states fully rolled out, a couple more that are like partially, like they may have one platform implementation, not the other, and expecting that to grow to at least half the U.S. states this year. That's making it available. Of those, the numbers that we've seen, there was actually a really good GovTech News article by Nikki Davidson recently that was pretty accurate on the amounts. It's about 5% adoption, and that may not seem like something that's going to move a needle, but if you have an addressable market of 5 million people, that's a worthwhile addressable market, like, right? So it's the time is now to start to jump in. It's actually, and in doing so, offering the acceptance of a mobile driver's license, you become another place that has it. It's about 50% of the US population that could get this if they know, and they don't. I mean, we don't, our DMVs don't advertise to us. Our government agencies
Yeah.
don't, and nor should they. And we don't know. You literally walk up to people on the street, they don't know. Oh, I could do that? Really? That's
Yeah.
convenient. Cool. So, the more places there are to use it, you start to create that pull. So you start to increase the addressable market for the solutions that you have while addressing your deterministic problems, starting to redirect fraud, at least in the moment.
Yeah, if there's real utility, it will drive itself, I
Yeah.
think, is what we'll definitely see. And interesting, we work with organizations through Doc Labs in the US, David, but we also operate a lot in Europe. And it's amazing the amount of UK-based platforms or ID and visa identity verification providers who are really all over this stuff, and wanting to be able to accept kind of mDLs broadly. Of course, we're seeing a lot of adoption in Australia, and so there's other parts of the world that are moving forward with this same kind of ISO standard. But I think everyone's eyes are on America just due to its size.
Well, but that also shows you that it's kind of a write once, deploy many scenario, right? Like I can go
Yeah,
into the UK and I can trust that, okay, with the UK Gov wallet, when the people put their credentials in that this year, I can start to see them too. So like from it, that's the advantage of the international standards, is that you can start to deploy and find from different regions of the world when you're a global company.
I guess there's some kind of early advantage, some first mover advantage here, David, as well. I mean, there are companies that they're not risk taking companies. Maybe they're not strong in tech, so they'll maybe be laggards and wait for things to be adopted. But there are always those innovative companies, whether the startups or otherwise, that really want to jump in. What do you see as the upside for those companies getting involved? Literally today at ground zero.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those opportunities that doesn't come along too often to actually to message your company in a way. Like I'll give them credit. I mean, Utah Community Credit Union, when they first started doing this in Utah, their comment was to their customers. They emailed their members like, "Hey, you can come and sign up and get a mobile driver's license. We're partnering with the state government to benefit your privacy. Look, this is how we're doing it. We're going to make things more efficient for you. We're going to use technology to our advantage, and um, and you get more control over this. You get more control over your ID data. You get to store it in a more secure place. You get to share what you." So that was their messaging to the customer base. That's the opportunity the companies have, is to make that messaging. Like, look, we're going to do everything we can. We're going to try new technology to benefit you, our customers, and our members. And so you don't get that jump, you don't get that early start too many times as opportunities to make sure that to make sure you do that. And at the same time, you could start to measure the differences between your analog processes and your digital processes, you get to learn along the way, and you get to learn early. You say, hey, on this vector, look, this is what's happening. On this vector, we see an increase in this friction or this problem. So you can learn early when there's a little less pressure, because when we get to, there's estimates that don't seem irrational that you'd have like 100 million people in the United States the end of next year in 2026. Um, so that's when the pressure's on. So you start early, start to measure what your return on investment is, message it well. You've got a big community of people, including who Leonard and I were talking about with mDL committees, where you can get support, and work together and find partners to do things. So it is a really good early opportunity, in my opinion.
You've convinced me, David. So
Okay.
yeah, I think you explained that very well. It wouldn't be a kind of technology orientated podcast without at least mentioning AI once. And Leonard, coming over to you, the notion that we're hearing the phrase agentic AI often, and which we could very quickly define as an AI agent acting on behalf of a user or users, to do something on their behalf. It could be making purchases or transactions or something like that. At Mastercard, is that something that's on your radar? And if it is, and hopefully it is, so what is the role that you see mDLs or digital ID playing in that type of environment?
It definitely is. In April, Mastercard announced Agent Pay, a program that's all about enabling secure and transparent AI-driven payments. It's a big step for us into what is commonly known as agentic commerce, where AI agents, as you said, Nick, can autonomously make purchases and manage transactions on users' behalf. We are building this on our existing tokenization technology with new agentic tokens to facilitate the payments initiated through conversational AI, meaning that AI will be able to, or AI agents will be able to handle everything from a consumer buying a new product online to cross-border payments. When it comes to mDLs playing a role, I think if we use our imagination and look forward to the next organic evolution of agentic commerce, mDLs will be a critical component for enabling identity verification for age-restricted goods or services, obviously alongside with other standards like W3C verifiable credentials or JSON web tokens. So yes, I believe AI agents will leverage identity verification standards, much like they'll use tokenization, for example, for payments. We're already seeing open standards emerge, like the Model Context Protocol or MCP, which was specifically designed to facilitate the communication between AI agents, users, tools, and other resources. One last thing I would like to mention is that AI regulation lags a little bit behind, and that's the case with innovation in general. But it's quickly catching up.
Very good. Thank you. So final question from me at least, and David, kind of starting with you, because I know you're probably fairly involved here, and if you want to jump in as well at the end, Leonard, please do so. What advice would you give to particularly financial institutions if they're just starting to plan for mDL acceptance now? What advice would you give to them?
So, yeah, and when they know they are starting to plan this now, financial institutions, retail, and so on, they are at least or have started to plan. So if you haven't started to plan, you may be behind the curve even. But that's one of the things. That's who we're trying to address in mDL Connection. I posted in the chat the links during the little break there. That's who we're trying to address. Who is that technology manager? We know that person needs to build a return on investment story. Right? They need to go and they need to get their approval from management to start to roll something out, right? They need to have the tools and the educational material and the summaries that are going to help them to do that. So if you're on that process, mdlconnection.com is a good place to start, and becoming involved with Secure Technology Alliance is a way to, like, hey, guess what? This one's great, but you know what I actually need? I need this, because you have a group of experts in the field willing to collaborate now and start to build that out. So the feedback link that I sent is one of these. You can get involved and start to that's certainly part of it. There's also a lot of good information now coming out of the European Union on the wallets there and the use cases, so that's other ways to educate of what's happening, since these will align. But yeah, I think there's a lot of pathways forward.
Yeah, excellent. And you can definitely come back, David. A guest that's not only answering questions but also posting in the chat is that's definitely a next level guest. So I appreciate you doing that for us as well. That's great. So that wraps up the kind of Q&A and the questions that we wanted to have. So kind of moving now into kind of audience Q&A. So I don't know if I'll just kind of offer them up to you guys to see who wants to answer. First question is from Ranveer, I think. And Ranveer is asking, does the MDL and payment card need to be in the same digital wallet? And then what are the pros and cons of them being in the same versus a separate wallet? So I don't know, Ranveer's kind of linking to payments then. Is that one you maybe want to pick up?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, all right, so one of the key things here is I think that there has to be user choice in this. They're going to feel comfortable. They're going to want to use a wallet. They're going to find a commercial wallet that they really like. Maybe they like the one that came with their phone. There has to be that choice. So this does have to, I think that's critically important in this. Do they have to be in the same wallet? Well, no. As of right now, this is what I was talking about earlier, that unification of payments, single tap to pay an ID, right? Like that's not achievable at the moment. But that is where efforts in standardization are starting to get published. Digital Credentials Protocol, which should be published shortly from OpenID Foundation, where you start to say, you start to support use cases where credentials are across multiple apps or wallets on the phone. And that is really important, because you look at so many use cases like international travel. Yes, I know that the airline needs my passport number. They would like my contact information, because they typically do. They want my home address sometimes, and I need to pay for it. So that's at least three different credentials right there, because the passport typically doesn't have your address on it. So the ability to disperse those requests across and to start to consolidate those requests as this builds out, I think we do have to support multiple apps in multiple places. Not to mention, you're going to have the option. I want to put my passport. I don't want to put my driver's license on my phone, and people have to have those options.
Is what you're describing there, David, the one part of the way I interpreted that is I went to an interesting, I was at the conference in Geneva, the Digital Global Collaboration last week, and we went to the FIDO Alliance talk, and they were talking about how passkeys work, and they're wanting to do something similar for credentials, where you might walk up and you might get a request for a credential, but rather than having to dig through like multiple wallets on your phone, it actually is able to look into all of the wallets and say, well, these are the credentials that you hold, and it could be 3 different wallets, and these are the credentials that are probably the most applicable to the request. Do you want to just send it off? And is that what you were thinking about there? Because it's almost moving beyond.
Yes. Yeah, it is, and I wouldn't say look into these wallets, because I don't think that's within the boundaries of it. But for the user to be presented with, hey, this set of data was requested. Do you want to approve me? Maybe it's you've told me that it's in this location or in this app, and so therefore I'll share it. But essentially that is that handoff. And you mentioned FIDO lines, like as with passkeys being an implementation, essentially like an anonymous credential that you get, unrelated to your identity credential, which is related to you, like the ability to use one to get the passkey, use the passkey in the future anonymously to like these are really good combinations of how these credentials can start to build up and be used.
Yeah, agreed. Very good. Leonard, did you want to pick up the next one? We've got a question from Edwards. This relates to kind of something I don't know. It's a payment card industry data security standard. And Edward is asking, what are our thoughts on the intersection of mobile driver's licenses and the payment card industry data security standard when mDLs are used during a payment process?
I think digital wallets will become front and center when it comes to looking at payments and identity solutions holistically. So it's very similar to the previous question. As a user, you might want the convenience of tapping once to pay and verify, right? But going back to what David said, and I completely agree, users must have the choice on how they manage their identity and payment tools. Based on what I know, at least there are no convergences in terms of industry standards between, let's say, ISO related for credit on debit and the ISO for mDL. But a digital wallet can act as a bridge between all these tools.
Very good. Thank you for that.
I know like PCI and PCI DSS are huge in the payments industry. When I mentioned interoperability earlier, this is one of the things that does come up. It's like I want to roll this out to my payment terminals. I know I need to go get that PCI certification again. So I think that question is open question, and the process is there or is started to start to, as these payment terminals evolve, let's like make sure that we've done the right education from the identity side over to the payment side and start to allow these certifications to evolve if they need to.
Yeah, thanks for that extra context, Dave. That's really helpful. One question I can pick off quickly is Milos. He's asking about identity standards across US and Europe. Will it be ISO 10813-5? I guess it's the in-person one. I think predominantly it's going to be that standard, certainly within the UK. They're using that standard, the US obviously as well. I haven't heard about anything else within Europe that would suggest that they're going to use a different standard. It kind of maybe wouldn't make sense at this point that they would pick up something new, but I don't know. Do you guys are aware of what the EU is doing with that in regard to the mDL format?
All right, so we're talking MDL. MDL is essentially the same thing as like what would you MID or mobile ID, right? Like we kind of talk about it as MDL in the United States because we use our driver's license as an identity card. 18013, I know this is going to be a soup of numbers. And so you can kind of point to one thing that starts to encompass together all of the different standards that I'll mention. So the European architecture reference framework for wallets actually includes a set of standards that can be used. So it has been done collaboratively around the world, which starts to smack of like, big collusion. But in fact, what it is the realization that you're going to cross borders with these and you want to be able to use it. So 18013-5 is for the in-person transmission of signed data from one device to another or in a token and response model, right? Where I give a token and the token is used to pull data from something, from my own service that I run maybe. That's 18013-5. 18013-7 moves that same from the phone where I can now present that to a website. So that's the sister standard to it that starts to add that. You can look at the OpenID for verifiable presentation standards, part of the European wallet framework, as being add-ons to that. Those two groups of things cross-reference to each other. And then you have the concept that people are going to put credentials from multiple wallets in from multiple places because they might live or have been born or have a passport from different places, right? So they're going to put into hopefully the wallet they choose, right? So you have the concept of being able to issue credentials in multiple standardized formats and in a standardized way, and identifying yourself to that, to that particular issuer. So that is the ISO 23220 standards. Those aren't necessarily numbers that you have to pull together, because if you start to look at Europe is the microcosm of this problem. 27 different countries that with huge privacy expectations, and so pulling them together and enumerating to get a set of standards, including the W3C standards for verifiable credentials. When you pull those all together, it makes a bit of an alphabet soup, I guess, but it also makes a set of things that can work internationally and give people control over what they choose to do.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Yeah, thanks for going through that. It was a lot more context than I appreciated, David. So I appreciate you educating me through that answer as well. That's pretty much us. We're out of time. We're at the top of the hour. But I really wanted to thank both Leonard and David for coming on and giving us those insights into really kind of a combination of mDLs and payments and the opportunities for business, and also hopefully the upside for users as well. So I really appreciate your time, guys. We didn't get quite through all the questions. There were some really interesting ones that came in that we'll probably try and address in future episodes, particularly those around some of the privacy discussions taking place in the world of mDLs today. I didn't want to chuck that hand grenade question in right at the end. So we'll leave that one for another day. But David and Leonard, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. It was great.